Sometimes the things we think we've lost forever find a way back to us when we need them most. Sometimes healing doesn't come from moving on, but from finding something worth fighting for again. 54-year-old Nolan Briggs had spent 2 years just trying to get through each day after his wife passed. He'd moved back to his childhood farm in Maple Ridge, hoping the familiar land might ease the emptiness. One cold November morning, he heard faint cries coming from an old barn at the edge of his property. Inside, he found over 200 starving puppies, abandoned and desperate. What happened next brought an entire town together in ways no one expected. Could one broken man's choice to help these helpless creatures become the beginning of something beautiful? Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The farmhouse still smelled like her sometimes. Nolan Briggs would walk through the kitchen in the early morning hours, half awake, and catch a trace of lavender, the hand lotion Diane had used for 30 years. Then he'd remember she was gone. 2 years, 3 months, and 16 days gone. But some mornings he forgot for just a moment, and those moments were both a gift and a fresh wound. He stood at the kitchen window now, watching the first grey light of November spread across the 70 acres that had been in his family for 3 generations. His father had worked this land until his hands couldn't grip the tools anymore. Nolan had left at 18, built a life elsewhere, but the farm had always been there, waiting, like a promise, like an anchor, like the last place left to go when everything else fell apart. The coffee maker sputtered behind him. Nolan turned, retrieved his mug, the one Diane had given him on their 20th anniversary. The glaze cracked now from years of use, and poured slowly, watching the dark liquid rise. These small rituals kept him tethered to something resembling normal life. "Dad, you up already?" Austin appeared in the doorway, his hair standing up in several directions, wearing the same sweatpants he'd had since college. 27 years old, and he still looked like a boy to Nolan sometimes. A boy who'd watched his mother waste away over 18 months of hospital visits and false hopes, and the terrible patience of cancer. "Couldn't sleep," Nolan said. "You want some?" Austin nodded, retrieved his own mug. They stood together in the quiet kitchen, 2 men who loved each other but had forgotten how to talk about anything that mattered. The silence between them had weight now, substance. It filled rooms. Austin had moved back home 6 months after the funeral. He'd been living in the city, working in marketing for a tech company, dating someone Nolan had met exactly twice. That relationship had ended. Austin said it wasn't because of the grief, but Nolan knew better. Grief changed everything. It reached into all the corners of your life and rearranged the furniture. "I was thinking," Austin said, cradling his mug in both hands, "we should walk the property today, check the fence lines, see what needs fixing before winter really sets in." Nolan glanced at his son. Austin had been making suggestions like this for weeks. Projects, tasks, reasons to move through the day with purpose. Nolan knew what he was doing. It was kind, really. Transparent, but kind. "All right," Nolan said, after breakfast. The farm had once been beautiful. Nolan's father had kept it immaculate. Fences painted, outbuildings maintained, every tool in its place. Nolan and Diane had continued that tradition in the early years of their marriage, before they'd moved away to start their dog-breeding business in the next county over. Golden retrievers, healthy and happy, raised with care and sold to families who sent Christmas cards for years afterward. It had been good work, meaningful work. Diane had loved those dogs like children. Before Austin came along, and even after, she'd poured herself into each litter. She'd kept a journal, a leather-bound book with her neat handwriting documenting bloodlines, temperaments, health records, and little observations about personality quirks. "Bella's daughter has her mother's gentle eyes," she'd written once. "She'll make some family very happy." The journal sat on Nolan's nightstand now. He hadn't opened it since her death. Couldn't. Some doors were better left closed. After Diane got sick, they'd stopped breeding dogs, sold the business, sold their house, moved into a small apartment near the hospital. The last 2 years of her life were measured in treatment cycles and blood counts and the steady erosion of hope. When she finally died, peacefully, the hospice nurse had said, as if peace was something you could measure, Nolan had felt nothing, just a vast emptiness where his wife had been. His father had died 3 months later, heart attack, sudden and complete. The lawyer had called to inform Nolan that he'd inherited the farm. Standing in that sterile apartment, phone pressed to his ear, Nolan had made a decision. There was nothing left for him in the city, nothing but memories in every restaurant and park bench and street corner. So he'd come home to Maple Ridge, to the place he'd started from, and Austin had followed. The town hadn't changed much. Population still hovering around 3,000, most families having lived there for generations. Everyone knew everyone else's business, for better or worse. When Nolan returned, people had been kind. Casseroles appeared on his porch. Beatrice Whitman, the 72-year-old widow who lived on the adjacent property, brought him homemade soup every Tuesday. Pastor Glenn from the Methodist Church stopped by monthly, never pushing, just sitting on the porch and talking about weather and crops and nothing important. They all watched him with careful eyes. Poor Nolan Briggs. Lost his wife, lost his father. Came home to fade away quietly. And for 2 years, that's exactly what Nolan had been doing. Fading, going through motions. The main house was in decent shape. He kept up with basic maintenance. But the outbuildings were crumbling. The old tobacco barn his grandfather had built was hidden under years of ivy growth. The equipment shed was missing half its roof. The fencing sagged in places, though they had no livestock to contain. Nolan had skills. He'd been good with his hands once, could fix nearly anything, had learned carpentry and electrical work from his father. But skill required caring, and caring required energy he didn't have. So the farm deteriorated around him while he drank coffee and watched the seasons change and wondered, in his darker moments, what the point of any of it was. Austin worried. Nolan could see it in the way his son watched him, in the careful suggestions and manufactured tasks. He wanted to reassure Austin that he was fine, that grief had a timeline and he was moving through it appropriately. But that would be a lie. The truth was simpler and more complicated. Nolan was stuck, not moving forward or backward, just existing in a grey space where nothing felt real anymore. After breakfast, eggs and toast, eaten in the same silence, they dressed for the cold and headed outside. November in Maple Ridge could be brutal. The temperature had dropped overnight, and frost covered everything in a delicate crystal coating that would melt by noon. They walked the near fields first, checking fence posts, noting repairs needed. Austin made a list on his phone. Nolan carried the toolbox out of habit, though they weren't fixing anything today, just assessing. The north pasture needs complete refencing, Austin said. Dad, that's going to be expensive. I know. Maybe we should consider selling some of the acreage. The land closest to the highway. Developers have been asking. Nolan stopped walking. This land stays in the family. I'm just saying. I know what you're saying. The land stays. It was the most forceful Nolan had been about anything in 2 years. Austin fell silent and they continued walking. They moved toward the outer reaches of the property, areas Nolan hadn't visited in months. The path was overgrown, branches catching at their jackets. The morning was absolutely quiet except for their footsteps and the occasional bird call. Nolan's breath came out in white puffs. His hands were cold even in gloves. That's when they heard it, faint at first, almost imperceptible. A sound that didn't belong to November, or empty fields, or the gentle decay of an abandoned farm. Whimpering, soft and desperate and coming from somewhere ahead. Nolan stopped. Austin heard it too. What is that? Austin asked. Nolan was already moving toward the sound, his pace quickening. The whimpering grew louder as they pushed through a stand of overgrown bushes. And then Nolan saw it, the old barn. His grandfather's barn, the one that had been unused for decades, covered now in ivy so thick you could barely see the walls. The sound was coming from inside. The barn doors were closed, secured with a rusted padlock that looked new despite its weathered appearance. "Dad, what?" But Nolan was already heading back toward the house, moving faster than Austin had seen him move in months. He returned minutes later with bolt cutters, breathing hard from the exertion. Without a word, he positioned the cutters on the padlock and squeezed. The lock resisted, then snapped. Nolan pulled the doors open. The smell hit them first, waste and fear and sickness. Then their eyes adjusted to the dim interior, and they saw what was making the sound. Puppies. Dozens and dozens of puppies, maybe more than 100, in makeshift wire pens and cardboard boxes and just loose on the filthy barn floor. Small bodies pressed against each other for warmth, empty food bowls scattered everywhere, water dishes tipped over or bone dry. And the eyes, so many eyes, looking up at them with desperate hope. "Oh my God," Austin whispered. Nolan stood frozen in the doorway, his mind trying to process what he was seeing. This couldn't be real. How could this be real? On his property, in his barn, this many suffering animals. A small puppy, some kind of terrier mix, crawled toward him. Its ribs showed through matted fur. It was shaking. And something in Nolan broke open. Or maybe something that had been broken finally started to mend. His hands, which had felt useless for 2 years, suddenly remembered their purpose. He knelt down, gathered the small body gently, felt its rapid heartbeat against his palm. "Austin," he said quietly, "go get blankets. All the blankets in the house. And water. And whatever food we have. Dad, we need to call someone. Animal control. Now, Austin." His son ran. Nolan stepped fully into the barn, still holding the trembling puppy. His eyes adjusted further. He could see now that there were even more dogs than he'd first thought. Different breeds, different ages, all in various states of neglect. Some were alert, watching him. Others lay motionless in corners. How long had they been here? Days, weeks. He spotted a piece of paper tacked to one of the support posts. A note scrawled in hasty handwriting. Couldn't feed them anymore. Bank took everything. God forgive me. Nolan read it 3 times. Someone had been running a breeding operation. Someone who'd gone bankrupt and abandoned these animals on his property, probably hoping someone would find them before it was too late. He looked around the barn at the sea of small faces, and for the first time in 2 years, Nolan Briggs felt something besides emptiness. He felt rage. He felt purpose. He felt the stirring of something he thought had died with Diane, the drive to protect, to heal, to fight for something that couldn't fight for itself. The small puppy in his arms whimpered again. Nolan held it closer. "I've got you," he whispered. "I've got you now." Austin returned with his arms full of blankets, breathing hard. Behind him came Beatrice Whitman, moving as quickly as her 72 years allowed, carrying a basket of what looked like kitchen towels and 2-gallon jugs of water. "Austin told me," she said, stopping at the barn entrance. Her hand flew to her mouth. Dear Lord in heaven. Nolan was still kneeling on the barn floor, the small terrier mix cradled against his chest. He looked up at Beatrice, and she saw something in his face she hadn't seen since before Diane died. Determination. "We need to assess them," Nolan said, his voice steady. "Figure out which ones need immediate help." "Nolan, this is too much for 3 people," Beatrice said gently. "We need to call after," Nolan interrupted. He set the terrier down carefully on one of the blankets Austin was spreading. "After we get water to all of them. After we figure out how many there are and what condition they're in. Then we call whoever we need to call." Austin knelt beside his father. "Dad, what are you doing?" "And what needs to be done?" Nolan stood, surveyed the barn with new eyes. He was thinking now, planning, his mind working in ways it hadn't in years. "Austin, start filling those bowls with water. Beatrice, can you check the ones in the back corner? I need to know if any of them aren't moving." They worked. There was something almost automatic about it, muscle memory taking over. Nolan moved from pen to pen, his hands gentle but efficient, checking each puppy. Some were alert enough to drink immediately when water was offered. Others were too weak to lift their heads. He counted as he went. 50, 75, 100. "Dad," Austin called. "This one's in bad shape." Nolan crossed to where his son stood, looking down at a small mixed-breed puppy, mostly beagle from the looks of it, lying on its side. Its breathing was shallow, rapid. Nolan knelt, placed his hand on the puppy's chest. The heartbeat was irregular. He'd felt this before, years ago, with the golden retrievers he and Diane had raised. He knew this rhythm. This was a life deciding whether to fight or let go. "We need a vet," Nolan said. "Now!" Austin already had his phone out. "There's a veterinary clinic in town, Dr. Phyllis Montgomery. She treated Mrs. Chen's cat last year. Call her. Tell her it's an emergency." While Austin made the call, Nolan continued his assessment. 120, 150. The number kept climbing. Some of the puppies were in better condition than others. They'd probably been here a shorter time, or had been stronger to begin with. But all of them showed signs of neglect. Matted fur, visible ribs, eyes that held too much fear for such young creatures. In the far corner, partially hidden by an overturned crate, Nolan found something that made his stomach turn. 3 small bodies already cold. They hadn't made it. However long these puppies had been abandoned here, it had been too long for these 3. He stood there for a moment, looking down at them. Such small things, such preventable deaths. The rage he'd felt earlier intensified, mixed now with grief that felt familiar and foreign at the same time. This grief had an outlet. This grief could be transformed into action. "Dr. Montgomery is on her way," Austin said, appearing beside him. He saw what Nolan was looking at and went quiet. "We need something to bury them in," Nolan said softly. "Dad, after we help the ones we can still save." By the time they'd given water to all the puppies they could find, the final count was 207 living animals. Dr. Montgomery's truck was pulling up the long driveway. She was a woman in her early 60s, grey hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing jeans and a fleece jacket with the clinic logo on it. She took one step into the barn and stopped. "Jesus, Mary and Joseph. We found them about an hour ago," Nolan said. "I'm Nolan Briggs. This is my property, but these aren't my dogs." Dr. Montgomery set down her medical bag and pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the county animal control. This is beyond anything I've seen in 30 years of practice." "That one first," Nolan pointed to the beagle mix that was barely hanging on. "Can you help that one first?" Something in his voice made her pause. She looked at him, really looked at him, and seemed to understand something. She nodded, crossed to the puppy and knelt down. "Get me more light," she said. "And hold him steady." Nolan held the small body while Dr. Montgomery examined it, listening with her stethoscope, checking vitals, moving with practiced efficiency. Austin stood nearby with his phone flashlight pointed at them. Beatrice had moved outside to call Pastor Glenn. "He's severely dehydrated," Dr. Montgomery said. "Malnourished. Possible pneumonia. I can give him fluids, antibiotics, but his chances—" She looked up at Nolan. "I won't lie to you. His chances aren't good, but they're not zero. No, they're not zero. Then we try." She prepared an IV, inserted it with the skill of long practice. The puppy didn't even react, too far gone to feel pain. They watched the fluids drip, watched his small chest rise and fall. "The others," Dr. Montgomery said quietly, "I need to assess all of them, figure out which ones need immediate medical intervention. But Mr. Briggs, you understand what you're looking at here? The cost alone, I understand, and the legal issues. Someone abandoned these animals. There will be investigations, paperwork, possible criminal charges. The county will want to take custody of all of them. Can they do that? Legally? Yes, these aren't your animals. They were abandoned on your property, but that doesn't make them yours." Nolan looked around the barn, at the sea of small faces still watching them with hope they didn't deserve to feel yet. "What if I want them to be mine?" Dr. Montgomery studied him. "That's a conversation for lawyers and bureaucrats. Right now I need to focus on keeping as many of these puppies alive as possible. You willing to help with that?" "Yes." "Then here's what we're going to do." For the next 3 hours, they worked in a kind of focused chaos. Dr. Montgomery examined each puppy, categorizing them by urgency. Critical, serious, moderate, stable. The critical ones, 7 in total, needed immediate transport to her clinic. The serious ones, 23, needed medical attention within the next several hours. The moderate and stable ones needed food, warmth, and monitoring. Austin drove to the farm supply store and returned with 50 pounds of puppy food, more blankets, and space heaters. Beatrice organized the barn into sections based on Dr. Montgomery's triage. Pastor Glenn arrived with 3 church members and more supplies. Word was spreading. By early afternoon, more people began showing up. Mrs. Beverly Quinn, the retired schoolteacher, brought towels and cleaning supplies. Her husband, Howard, came with tools to repair some of the broken pens. A young couple Nolan didn't recognize arrived with cases of bottled water and puppy training pads. Maple Ridge was a small town. News traveled fast. And something about 200 abandoned puppies and Nolan Briggs trying to save them, resonated with people. By evening, the critical puppies were at Dr. Montgomery's clinic, hooked to IVs and monitors. The barn had been cleaned, organized, heated. The remaining puppies had been fed, tentatively at first, then with increasing enthusiasm as they realized food was real and available. Some were already looking better, eyes brighter, tails beginning to wag. Nolan sat on an overturned crate, exhausted in a way he hadn't felt in years. Good exhaustion. The kind that came from using your body for something that mattered. Austin sat beside him. Dad, we need to talk about what happens next. I know. This is 200 dogs. Even if some of them get adopted quickly, we're talking months of care. Maybe longer. The cost, I know, Austin. And the county. Dr. Montgomery said they'll probably want to take custody. Nolan was quiet for a moment. Around them, the barn was settling into evening sounds. Soft whimpers, the rustle of puppies adjusting in their blankets, the hum of space heaters. He looked at his son. Your mother kept a journal. About the dogs we raised. Did you know that? Austin shook his head. She wrote about each one like they were individuals, like they mattered. She'd be... His voice caught. He cleared his throat. She'd be the first one in this barn. She wouldn't care about the cost or the logistics or the county rules. She'd just see creatures that needed help, and she'd help them. So what are you saying? I'm saying I'm not letting the county take them. I'm saying we figure this out, whatever it takes. Austin looked at his father in the dim barn light and saw something he'd been hoping to see for 2 years. His dad returned to himself. Okay, Austin said. Then we figure it out. That night, Nolan didn't go back to the main house. He spread a sleeping bag in the corner of the barn, surrounded by the sounds of 200 puppies finally sleeping with full bellies and a little hope. The small terrier mix he'd first picked up, already he was thinking of it as his, curled up against his side. He lay there in the darkness, listening to breathing that wasn't his own, feeling needed in a way he'd forgotten how to feel. His phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Montgomery. Lost one of the critical cases. The little beagle mix. I'm sorry. The other 6 are stable for now. Nolan closed his eyes. The beagle puppy hadn't made it. He'd known it was unlikely, but knowing didn't make it easier. He thought about Diane, about all the things she'd tried to teach him about accepting what you couldn't control while fighting for what you could. I couldn't save that one, he whispered into the darkness. But I can save these. The terrier puppy stirred against him, made a small sound in its sleep. Nolan's hand found its warm body, felt the steady heartbeat that had been failing this morning and was now growing stronger. Tomorrow would bring questions and challenges and probably more heartbreak. But tonight, for the first time in 2 years, Nolan Briggs felt like he had a reason to face tomorrow. The first real problem announced itself at 6 the next morning when Nolan woke to the sound of 40 puppies howling for breakfast. He sat up in his sleeping bag, disoriented for a moment, then remembered where he was. The barn, 206 puppies, a responsibility he'd taken on without fully thinking through what it meant. His back ached from sleeping on the floor. His muscles protested as he stood. He was 54 years old, and his body was reminding him of that fact with every movement. But the puppies were crying, and crying puppies needed to be fed. Austin appeared in the doorway carrying 2 bags of dog food. His hair was wet from a shower, and he looked more alert than he had any right to be. I ordered more supplies online last night. Should be here this afternoon. In the meantime, I bought out everything the feed store had. You went to town already. Couldn't sleep. Figured I'd make myself useful. Austin set the bags down. Dad, we need a system. We can't just react to every need as it comes up. He was right, of course. Nolan looked around the barn at the organized chaos they'd created yesterday. It had worked in the moment, but it wasn't sustainable. They needed structure, routine, a plan that could last weeks or months. Make a list, Nolan said. Everything we need to do daily. Feeding schedules, cleaning schedules, medical checks. Write it all down. While Austin worked on that, Nolan began feeding the puppies. He moved from section to section, filling bowls, watching to make sure the weaker ones got their share. Some of the puppies were already showing improvement. Brighter eyes, more energy, tails that actually wagged. Others were still struggling, moving slowly, eating tentatively. In the middle pen, Nolan found one of the smaller puppies, a black and white mix that looked part border collie, lying in the same position as yesterday. He knelt down, touched its side. Still warm, still breathing, but barely. This was the pattern. Some would bounce back quickly. Others would fade despite everything. He picked up the puppy, cradled it against his chest. Its eyes opened briefly, looked at him with something that might have been gratitude or might have been exhaustion. Hard to tell. Come on, little one, Nolan whispered. Don't give up yet. His phone rang. Dr. Montgomery. Mr. Briggs, we lost another one overnight. One of the critical cases. But the other 5 are improving. I think they're going to make it. That's good news about the 5. It is. But I need you to understand something. Not all of them are going to survive. You did everything right. Found them when you did, got help. But some of these puppies were already too far gone. You can't blame yourself for that. Nolan looked down at the puppy in his arms. Understood. I've contacted County Animal Control. Inspector Douglas Pritchard will be visiting you today. He's thorough. Expect lots of questions. After the call ended, Nolan sat on his makeshift crate, still holding the weak puppy. Around him, the barn was alive with sound and motion. Puppies eating, playing, exploring their clean pens. It was overwhelming and beautiful and terrifying all at once. Beatrice arrived at 7:30 with coffee and breakfast sandwiches. Figured you boys might need sustenance. You're a saint, Beatrice. Hardly. Just a nosy neighbor who wants to help. She looked around the barn, nodded approvingly. You've organized it well. Who would have thought Nolan Briggs would end up running a puppy rescue operation? I haven't agreed to run anything. I'm just keeping them alive, I know. But people are talking, Nolan. The whole town knows what you found here, and they're inspired by it. You should see the church ladies. They're already organizing donation drives. Beatrice, I don't even know if I'm allowed to keep these dogs. The county might take them. Let them try. You think anyone in Maple Ridge is going to stand by and watch that happen? She smiled. You've given people something to care about. Don't underestimate what that means to a town like ours. Inspector Pritchard arrived at 10 o'clock in a county vehicle, clipboard in hand. He was a man in his late 40s, balding, with the careful expression of someone who'd learned not to show emotion on the job. He walked through the barn methodically, taking notes, asking questions. How many total? 206 living. 3 were already deceased when we found them. 1 more died at the vet clinic last night. And you found them when? Yesterday morning. Around 9. The note said the operation went bankrupt. You have any idea who was running it? No. The barn has been abandoned for years. I hadn't been out to this part of the property in months. Pritchard wrote everything down. The conditions they were in, that's animal cruelty. Criminal charges will be filed once we identify the responsible party. In the meantime, these animals are evidence. Nolan felt his stomach tighten. What does that mean? That means they should be in county custody. At our facility. Your facility built for 200 dogs. No, but you have the staff to care for them. The space? The resources? Pritchard's jaw tightened. Mr. Briggs, I understand you've done a good thing here. But there are procedures, regulations. Those puppies have been through enough. Moving them now, stressing them further, some of them are barely hanging on. Is that really in their best interest? What I'm hearing, Pritchard said carefully, is that you want to keep them here, temporarily, until they're healthy enough to be adopted. I'm not trying to start a business or break any laws. I'm trying to keep them alive. Pritchard looked around the barn, at the organized pens, the space heaters, the feeding stations. He looked at the puppies, many of them sleeping now after their morning meal. Then he looked at Nolan. You understand the liability you're taking on? The cost? One person can't care for 200 dogs. I'm not one person. I have help. As if on cue, Beverly Quinn walked in carrying more blankets. Her husband Howard was behind her with a toolbox. Pastor Glenn arrived moments later with 2 more church members. Pritchard watched this small parade of volunteers, then turned back to Nolan. You have 72 hours to show me you can handle this. Proper sanitation, adequate food and water, medical care for the ones who need it. I'll be back Thursday. If this operation doesn't meet standards, I'm removing the animals. Are we clear? Crystal. After Pritchard left, Austin joined his father outside the barn. That could have gone worse. Could have gone better, too. 72 hours isn't much time. Then we better get to work. They did. That afternoon became a blur of activity. Howard repaired the broken pens, reinforced the weak ones. Beverly organized a cleaning rotation among the volunteers. Pastor Glenn made calls to other churches, spreading the word about needed supplies. A local contractor named Felix stopped by and offered to install better lighting in the barn at no charge. Dr. Montgomery returned in the evening to check on the puppies. She examined the weak ones, administered medications, gave instructions. When she finished, she found Nolan sitting with the border collie mix that hadn't improved. That one's struggling, she said gently. I know. Sometimes the kindest thing... Not yet. Nolan looked up at her. Not unless there's no hope at all. She knelt beside him, placed her hand on the puppy. Okay, not yet. But Nolan, I need to talk to you about money. My services aren't free, and these puppies need ongoing care. The bill is already over $5,000. It's going to keep climbing. I have some savings. Not enough for this. Not nearly enough. She paused. I can reduce my fees. I want to help. But you need to think about sustainability. How are you going to pay for food, medical care, facility improvements? You can't do this on good intentions alone. After she left, Nolan sat in the barn as darkness fell. The puppies were settling for the night, their small bodies curled together for warmth despite the space heaters. Austin was in the house researching non-profit status and animal rescue regulations. The volunteers had gone home, promising to return tomorrow. Nolan held the dying border collie mix, feeling its shallow breathing against his chest. He thought about Dr. Montgomery's words. She was right, of course. Money was going to be a problem, a big problem. His savings might last a month, maybe 2 if he was careful. Then what? The puppy in his arms stirred, made a small sound. Not distress exactly. Something else. Its eyes opened, looked up at him. And then, miracle of miracles, its tail moved. Just a tiny wag, barely perceptible. But it was there. That's right, Nolan whispered. You fight, his phone buzzed. A text from Beverly Quinn. Church collected $847 in donations today. It's a start. Don't give up. Nolan looked around the barn at the puppies he'd promised to save. 206 lives depending on him. It was terrifying and impossible, and exactly what he needed. He pulled out his wallet, found the photograph he kept there. Diane, young and smiling, holding their first rescue dog. He studied her face in the dim light. I don't know if I can do this, he said to the photograph. Sorry to twist too small. But I'm going to try. The border collie puppy wagged its tail again, stronger this time. Nolan held it close and allowed himself to hope. Thursday morning arrived cold and clear. Nolan had spent another night in the barn, and his body was paying the price. Every joint ached as he stood, stretching muscles that protested the movement. But the border collie puppy, he'd started calling her Scout in his mind, had made it through the night. That felt like a victory worth celebrating. Austin appeared earlier than usual, carrying 2 thermoses of coffee and a determined expression. Inspector Pritchard will be here at noon. I've made a checklist of everything we need to show him. They worked through the morning with focused intensity. Every pen was cleaned, every water bowl filled, every puppy examined for signs of improvement or decline. Beverly and Howard arrived at 8, followed by Pastor Glenn and 4 church members Nolan was just beginning to recognize by name. The operation had developed a rhythm over the past 3 days. Morning feeding at 6 and 7, cleaning rotation from 8 to 10, medical checks at 11, afternoon feeding at 3 and 4, evening cleanup at 6. Someone was in the barn at all hours, monitoring the puppies who still struggled, celebrating the ones who were thriving. Nolan had stopped counting hours of sleep. There weren't enough of them, and dwelling on exhaustion only made it worse. Instead, he focused on small victories. Scout eating solid food, a golden mix finally lifting its head. 3 puppies playing together for the first time. Inspector Pritchard arrived exactly at noon. Accompanied by Dr. Montgomery, they walked through the barn together. Pritchard making notes, Dr. Montgomery examining puppies. Nolan followed, answering questions, showing documentation Austin had prepared. Water changed 3 times daily, Austin explained, showing his charts. Feeding schedule posted here. Medical log maintained by Dr. Montgomery. Cleaning rotation tracked on this spreadsheet. Pritchard examined everything. He checked the pens, the ventilation, the heating system. He watched how the volunteers interacted with the puppies. He spent nearly 2 hours going through every detail. Finally, he stood in the center of the barn and looked at Nolan. You've exceeded minimum standards. I'm surprised, honestly. 3 days ago, this was a disaster. Now it's, he paused, searching for words. It's functional. Does that mean we can keep them here? Austin asked, temporarily. But Mr. Briggs, you need proper licensing. You're running what amounts to an animal shelter without authorization. I can give you 30 days to file the necessary paperwork and meet all regulatory requirements. After that, we revisit this situation. After Pritchard left, Nolan sat down heavily on his crate. 30 days. It felt like both forever and no time at all. We can do this, Austin said. I've already been researching. We need to file for non-profit status, get proper zoning approval, meet health and safety codes, and pay for all of it, Nolan finished. Austin, the money is coming in. Look, Austin showed his phone. Beverly set up a donation page online. We've raised $3,000 in 2 days. The Maple Ridge Gazette wants to do a story. Pastor Glenn says 3 other churches have committed to monthly donations. Nolan stared at the numbers on the screen. $3,000. It seemed like a fortune and a drop in the bucket simultaneously. Dr. Montgomery's bill alone was already past $8,000. That evening, a reporter named Jennifer Wu from the Gazette arrived with a photographer. She interviewed Nolan in the barn, asking questions about how he'd found the puppies, why he'd decided to help, what his plans were. Nolan was uncomfortable with the attention. He tried to redirect the focus to the volunteers, to the community response, to anything but himself. But Jennifer kept bringing it back. Mr. Briggs, people are saying you've become a symbol of hope for Maple Ridge, the widower who found purpose in saving abandoned animals. How does that make you feel? I'm not a symbol of anything, Nolan said quietly. I'm just a man trying to do right by some dogs that got dealt a bad hand. The article appeared in Saturday's paper with a front page. Photo of Nolan holding Scout. The headline read, "Local man turns grief into purpose. Rescues 200 abandoned puppies. Nolan hated it." The attention felt invasive, the narrative too neat. His grief wasn't something that could be packaged into an inspiring story. Diane's death wasn't the catalyst for some redemptive journey. He was just trying to get through each day, and the puppies gave him a reason to do that. But the article had an effect he couldn't deny. Donations increased. More volunteers showed up. A local veterinary student named Casey offered to intern at the barn 3 days a week. A pet supply store in the next town over donated 500 pounds of puppy food. People want to help, Beatrice told him one afternoon. Let them. There's no shame in accepting support. By the end of the 2nd week, they'd established something that almost resembled stability. 147 puppies remained. 60 had been adopted through a carefully vetted process Austin had developed. The adoptions brought in modest fees that helped offset costs. Though they were still spending far more than they brought in, Nolan had moved a cot into the barn's small office, officially accepting that this was where he lived now. Austin had taken over the main house, turned the dining room into an administrative center, covered the walls with schedules and charts and paperwork. The relationship between father and son had shifted. They'd found a way to work together, communicate about practical matters, share the burden of responsibility. It wasn't the deep connection Nolan wished for, but it was something. Progress measured in small increments. One evening, Lauren Quinn, Beverly's daughter, stopped by with dinner for Austin. She was 29, taught elementary school, had a warm smile and easy laugh. Nolan watched his son's face light up when she walked in, saw the careful way they interacted, the glances that lasted a beat too long. "Your son likes my daughter," Beverly said, appearing beside Nolan. "Seems that way. She likes him too. Lost her mother when she was 12. Cancer. She understands what he's been through." Nolan glanced at Beverly, saw the hope in her eyes. "You matchmaking, Beatrice. I'm observing. There's a difference." She paused. "He's a good young man, your Austin. You raised him well. You and Diane both." It was the first time anyone had mentioned Diane's name directly in weeks. Everyone tiptoed around it, afraid of causing pain. But Beverly said it naturally, like it was normal to acknowledge the dead. "She would have loved this," Nolan said quietly. "The chaos, the purpose, all of it. Then maybe you're honoring her by doing it." That night, Nolan finally opened Diane's garden journal. He sat in the barn office, Scout sleeping at his feet, and read his wife's handwriting by lamplight. The entries were mundane and beautiful. Notes about planting schedules, observations about the dogs, little reflections on daily life. On one page, she'd written, "Nolan fixed the gate today. Didn't ask him to, just noticed it needed doing and did it." That's who he is, someone who sees what needs fixing and fixes it. He read that line 3 times. Saw what needs fixing and fixes it. Was that still true? Had these puppies given him back that part of himself? He turned more pages, found an entry from shortly before her diagnosis. "Sometimes I worry about what will happen to Nolan if something happens to me. He loves so deeply. That's his strength and his vulnerability. I hope he finds purpose again if I'm gone. I hope he finds something worth fighting for." Nolan closed the journal, his vision blurred. She'd known. Somehow she'd known that he would need something to fight for. And here it was, 206 puppies that had become 147, each one depending on him to keep fighting. Scout stirred at his feet, looked up at him with eyes that were finally clear and bright. "She'd like you," Nolan told the puppy. "She'd say you've got spirit." His phone buzzed. A text from Austin. "Lauren and I are going to dinner tomorrow. She suggested we could double date. You and Dr. Montgomery." Nolan stared at the message. A date. He couldn't remember the last time he'd even considered such a thing. Before Diane got sick, certainly. A lifetime ago. He typed back, "I don't think I'm ready for that." Austin's response came quickly. "Okay, but Dad, eventually you'll need to let yourself live again." Mom would want that. Nolan set the phone down. Living again. What did that even mean? He was living now, wasn't he? Going through days, making decisions, caring for these animals. That was a form of living, but he knew what Austin meant. Actually engaging with life, letting people in, allowing for possibility. Not yet, maybe not ever, but the fact that he could even consider it felt like progress. Outside, November rain began to fall, tapping on the barn roof. Inside, 147 puppies slept safely, their bellies full, their small lives no longer in immediate danger. And Nolan Briggs, the broken widower of Maple Ridge, sat with his wife's journal and allowed himself to remember her not with pain, but with gratitude. It was a small step, but it was something. The invoice arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by certified mail. Nolan signed for it, opened the envelope, and felt his stomach drop. $18,000. Dr. Montgomery's cumulative bill for veterinary services rendered over the past 6 weeks. He sat down on the porch steps, the paper shaking slightly in his hands. 18,000. He had maybe 12,000 left in savings. The donations were helping. They'd raised another 4,000 through the online campaign and various fundraisers, but it wasn't nearly enough. Austin found him there 20 minutes later, still staring at the numbers. "Dad?" Nolan handed him the invoice without speaking. Austin read it, his face going pale. Okay, we can handle this. We can set up a payment plan, maybe negotiate with what? We're barely covering daily expenses as it is. Food, heating, supplies, it adds up faster than the donations come in. Then we raise more money. We do a bigger fundraiser. We reach out to regional news outlets, get more exposure, or I take a loan against the farm. No. Austin's voice was sharp. Dad, no. You are not risking losing this land. What choice do I have? We can't keep running up debt. They argued for the first time in weeks. Austin wanted to find creative solutions, increase fundraising efforts, cut costs wherever possible. Nolan saw only the mounting numbers and diminishing options. The conversation ended with Austin walking away, frustrated, and Nolan sitting alone with an impossible decision. That evening, Pastor Glenn organized a community meeting at the church. 50 people showed up, more than Nolan expected. They gathered in the fellowship hall, sitting on folding chairs, drinking coffee from styrofoam cups. Beverly stood at the front. We're here to discuss the future of the sanctuary. As most of you know, the costs are significant. We need to decide how we move forward as a community. The discussion that followed was heated. Some people were enthusiastic, proposing elaborate fundraising schemes and long-term sustainability plans. Others were skeptical. Why should we bankrupt ourselves for someone else's abandoned dogs? Asked Carl Henderson, a farmer in his 60s. Briggs did a good thing finding them, but at some point this becomes irresponsible. Those dogs didn't ask to be abandoned, Beverly countered. And Nolan didn't ask to find them. But now that we know they're there, what kind of people would we be if we just walked away? The practical kind, Carl shot back. The kind who understand that charity has limits. Others joined in. The debate circled around responsibility, community values, financial reality, and moral obligation. Nolan sat in the back, listening, feeling the weight of all these opinions about a decision he'd made in a moment of impulse. Then Councilwoman Iris Donovan stood up. She was in her mid-50s, always impeccably dressed, with the smooth delivery of a practiced politician. Nolan didn't know her well. She'd moved to Maple Ridge 5 years ago and quickly climbed into local government. I think we can all agree Mr. Briggs has done admirable work, she began. The question is sustainability. Running an animal sanctuary requires resources, expertise, proper facilities. Perhaps the solution is to transfer operations to someone better equipped to handle it. Who did you have in mind? Pastor Glenn asked. Well, as it happens, I've been in conversation with a regional animal welfare organization. They've expressed interest in taking over the operation. They have the infrastructure, the funding, the professional staff. Of course, they'd need to relocate the animals to their facilities. And the Briggs property? Austin asked from the front row, his voice careful. Donovan smiled. The property has potential for other uses that could benefit the community. Commercial development, perhaps. I'd be willing to facilitate that transition, help Mr. Briggs get fair value for his land so he can move on from this burden. The room went quiet. Nolan felt everyone's eyes turn toward him. I'm not selling, he said quietly. Mr. Briggs, be reasonable. You're drowning in debt for a problem that isn't yours to solve. I'm not selling. Louder this time. Donovan's smile tightened. Then we'll need to discuss other options. Perhaps mandatory inspections, stricter oversight, ensuring you're meeting all regulatory requirements. He's meeting them, Dr. Montgomery interrupted, standing up. I've documented everything. The sanctuary exceeds minimum standards in every category, for now. But what about next month, next year? Mr. Briggs, I'm trying to help you see reality. Reality is, those puppies are alive because of my father, Austin said, standing as well. Reality is, this community came together to support something good. Reality is, we don't need your help or your development plans. The meeting ended in tense disagreement. Some people pledged increased support. Others left shaking their heads. Donovan departed with a fixed smile that didn't reach her eyes. Outside, Pastor Glenn pulled Nolan aside. She wants your land. Has for a while, apparently. I heard rumors she'd tried to buy it from your father before he died. Why? Location. It's close to the highway. Could be valuable for commercial development. She probably saw an opportunity when you inherited it. Nolan drove home in silence, Austin beside him. The night was cold, stars sharp overhead. When they reached the farm, Austin finally spoke. We're not giving up, I know. And you're not selling. I know that too. In the barn, Scout greeted him with enthusiastic tail wagging. The puppy had gained weight, her coat was shiny, and she followed Nolan everywhere. Dr. Montgomery said she could be adopted soon, but Nolan kept finding reasons to delay that conversation. He did his evening rounds, checking on each section. Casey, the veterinary student, was working late, monitoring a new arrival, a puppy someone had found on the roadside and brought to the sanctuary. Word had spread that the Briggs place took in strays. How's the new one? Nolan asked. Stable. Scared, but no major injuries. He'll be okay with time and care. Casey looked at him. I heard about the meeting. People are talking. I imagine they are. For what it's worth, most of them support you. Donovan's always been... She paused, choosing words carefully. She sees everything as an opportunity. This is just another one to her. After Casey left, Nolan sat with Scout in the quiet barn. He thought about Donovan's offer, about the easy way out it represented. Sell the land, take the money, let someone else handle the problem. Walk away from all of it, except he couldn't. Not just because it was his family's land, though that mattered, but because walking away now would mean abandoning these animals who'd already been abandoned once. It would mean giving up on the purpose he'd found, the healing that had started. His phone rang. Dr. Montgomery. Nolan. I've been thinking about the bill. I can cut my fees in half going forward. And I'll set up a payment plan for what you already owe. No interest. Phyllis, you can't afford... Neither can you. But we're doing this together, right? That's what community means, she paused. I lost my husband 8 years ago. Threw myself into work because I didn't know what else to do. This sanctuary, helping you with it, it's given me something I didn't know I was missing. So don't argue with me about money. We'll figure it out. After she hung up, Nolan sat in the darkness and felt the knot in his chest loosen slightly. He wasn't alone in this. He'd forgotten what that felt like. Having people who cared enough to share the burden. Scout put her head on his knee. He stroked her ears, feeling their soft texture. Your mom would like Dr. Montgomery, he told the puppy. She'd say the grumpy ones usually have the biggest hearts. Outside, winter wind rattled the barn walls. Inside, 147 puppies slept safely. And Nolan Briggs, who'd spent 2 years convinced he had nothing left to give, discovered he still had reserves of determination he'd forgotten existed. He pulled out his phone and texted Austin, "We fight. Whatever it takes." The response came quickly. "Whatever it takes." "I'm with you, Dad." Nolan closed his eyes and allowed himself a moment of gratitude. For his son, for this community, for these animals that had given him a reason to keep going. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight this was enough. Scout's collar was nothing fancy, just a strip of old leather Nolan had found in the workshop, cut down to puppy size with a simple brass buckle. He'd made it on a quiet afternoon when Scout was sleeping beside his workbench, her small body finally healthy enough to run and play like puppies should. The collar represented something, though he couldn't quite articulate what. Maybe it was permanence. Maybe it was hope. Or maybe it was just an old man admitting he'd gotten attached to a dog he'd once thought wouldn't survive the night. 3 months into the sanctuary operation, patterns had emerged. Morning feeding was routine now. The volunteers knew their roles without being asked. Casey had brought in 2 more veterinary students to help with medical care. The barn was warm, clean, organized. They'd adopted out another 40 puppies, leaving 107 in residence. Each adoption was carefully vetted, home visits, reference checks, follow-up appointments. Austin had created a system that would have impressed any professional rescue operation. The fundraiser, Pause for Hope, had been Beverly's idea. A community carnival with games, food stalls, local vendors, and most importantly, opportunities to meet adoptable puppies. They'd spent 2 weeks planning, recruiting volunteers, securing permits. The day arrived cold but clear. By 10 in the morning, the town square was packed. Families with children, elderly couples, teenagers volunteering at booths. The smell of cotton candy and grilled food filled the air. A local band played folk music on a small stage. Nolan stood at the sanctuary's booth, Scout at his feet wearing her handmade collar, watching the crowd with a mixture of wonder and discomfort. This many people, all here because of something he'd started, felt surreal. "Dad, we've raised $22,000, Austin said, checking his phone. "And it's only 1 o'clock, 22,000. Nolan tried to process the number. It would cover Dr. Montgomery's bill, with money left over for operations. It was more than he'd hoped for, more than seemed possible. Councilwoman Donovan arrived at 2, accompanied by a photographer. She wore an expensive coat and carried a large check, made out to the sanctuary for $5,000. The photographer positioned her next to Nolan for photos. "Smile, Mr. Briggs," she said through her own practiced smile. "This is good publicity for both of us." Nolan smiled because refusing would look churlish, but something about her presence felt wrong. Too calculated, too performative. After the photos, she lingered. "Impressive turnout. You've really captured the community's imagination. People are generous. They are. Though I wonder about long-term sustainability. These emotional responses fade, you know. 6 months from now, will they still be donating? Will they still care?" She paused. "My offer still stands, Mr. Briggs. Let professionals handle this. You could walk away with dignity intact, not interested." Her smile never wavered. "We'll see." After she left, Dr. Montgomery appeared at his elbow. "That woman is trouble. I'm starting to realize that. I did some digging. She's been buying up property along the highway corridor. Has plans for a shopping complex. Your land is the last piece she needs for road access." Dr. Montgomery crossed her arms. "She's not going to give up easily." The carnival continued into evening. By the time they counted final donations, the total had reached $35,000, more than enough to pay the veterinary bill and cover operations for several months. That night, volunteers and supporters gathered at the barn for an impromptu celebration. Someone brought champagne. Pastor Glenn offered a blessing. People laughed and hugged and shared stories about the puppies they'd adopted or helped care for. Nolan stood slightly apart, watching. Austin and Lauren were together, his arm around her shoulders, her head leaning against him. They'd been dating officially for 3 weeks now, and Nolan could see the careful way they navigated grief and hope together. Beverly found him in his usual corner. "You did good today." "We all did." "No, Nolan, you gave people something to believe in. Don't minimize that." He wanted to deflect, to redirect credit elsewhere, but her expression stopped him. She wasn't making polite conversation. She was telling him something she needed him to hear. "After my husband died," Beverly continued, "I spent 2 years barely leaving the house. Stopped teaching. Stopped seeing friends. Just stopped. Then one day, Lauren came over and told me I had to make a choice. Keep disappearing or find something to live for." She looked at the puppies sleeping in their pens. "You chose to live. And you helped the rest of us remember how to do that too." The celebration wound down. People drifted home with promises to return tomorrow. Austin and Lauren left together, heading to dinner. The barn grew quiet except for puppy sounds and the hum of heaters. Nolan sat with Scout, feeling the day settle around him. $35,000. Community support. Systems that worked. For the first time since finding the puppies, sustainability seemed possible. His phone buzzed. An unknown number. He answered. "Mr. Briggs? This is Felix Grayson. I'm an attorney in Millbrook County. I represent the creditors of Gerald Finch's estate." Nolan's stomach tightened. "I'm listening." Mr. Finch operated a dog breeding business that went bankrupt last year. We've recently discovered that approximately 200 dogs from his operation were relocated, without authorization, to your property. As creditors of his estate, we're entitled to recover assets. Those dogs are assets, Mr. Briggs. Those dogs were dying when I found them, abandoned, starving. Nevertheless, they belong to Mr. Finch's estate. We're prepared to offer you 2 options. Return all remaining dogs to our custody, or pay fair market value, $75,000. That's insane. That's the law, Mr. Briggs. You have 2 weeks to decide. After that, we'll be forced to pursue legal remedies. He paused. I should mention the families who adopted dogs from you. They'll be contacted as well. Those adoptions were unauthorized. The animals will need to be returned. The call ended. Nolan sat in stunned silence, the celebration's joy evaporating like morning fog. Austin returned an hour later to find his father still sitting in the same spot, Scout in his lap. Dad, what happened? Nolan explained. The creditors, the demand, the threat to contact adoptive families. Austin's face went from confusion to anger to determination. We fight this. With what? We just got out of debt and now they want $75,000? Then we hire a lawyer. We make them prove ownership. Austin stopped, seeing his father's expression. Dad, you're not actually considering giving them the dogs? I'm considering that we might not have a choice. There's always a choice. But as Nolan lay awake that night, staring at the barn ceiling, he wasn't sure that was true. They'd come so far, built so much, and now it could all be taken away by lawyers and technicalities and the cruel machinery of bankruptcy law. Scout slept beside him, her small body warm against his side. He thought about the families who'd adopted puppies, the elderly man who'd found companionship, the young couple who sent weekly photos, the single mother whose daughter had bonded with a shy retriever mix. All of them would be contacted. All of them would be asked to return their dogs. It was unthinkable, cruel, but apparently legal. He reached for his wallet, pulled out Diane's photograph. In the dim light, her smile seemed both encouraging and heartbreaking. I don't know how to fix this one, he whispered to the image. I don't know if I can. Scout stirred, looked up at him with trusting eyes that said he'd saved her once and would save her again. Nolan closed his eyes and prayed, something he hadn't done since Diane died, for wisdom, for strength, for a way through this that didn't end in heartbreak for everyone involved. Outside, winter stars wheeled overhead. Inside, 107 puppies slept, unaware that their safety had just become uncertain again. The legal summons arrived 3 days later, delivered by a process server who looked apologetic as he handed Nolan the papers. Official, binding, terrifying in its bureaucratic precision. Austin read through the documents twice, his jaw tightening with each page. They're claiming the puppies are assets of Finch's bankruptcy estate, that you had no legal right to take possession or facilitate adoptions. They want all remaining animals returned and monetary compensation for the ones already adopted. Can they do that? Apparently they think so. Austin set the papers down. We need a lawyer. A good one. The lawyer they found, pro bono, through Pastor Glenn's connections, was Felix Grayson, ironically the same name as the attorney who'd called representing the creditors. Different person, fortunately. This Felix was younger, maybe 35, with earnest eyes and an aggressive approach to animal welfare law. This is complicated, he said, sitting in Nolan's kitchen, documents spread across the table. Legally, abandoned property can be claimed by whoever finds it, but animals occupy a grey area. They're property under the law, but they're also living beings with welfare considerations. So what are our options? Austin asked. We argue that the animals were in imminent danger, and you acted out of necessity. We argue that Finch abandoned them, relinquishing any ownership rights. We argue that the creditors can't claim proceeds from what amounts to animal cruelty. He paused. But I need to be honest. This could go either way, and it's going to take time and money we might not have. After Felix left, Nolan walked to the barn. Scout followed, her presence a small comfort. Inside, the puppies were having their afternoon feeding. Volunteers moved between pens, talking softly, filling bowls. Normal operations continuing despite the crisis. Casey approached him. I heard about the legal trouble. Is it true they might take the dogs? Maybe. That's insane. These animals were dying. You saved them. Apparently that doesn't matter to bankruptcy courts. That evening, something else emerged. Austin was researching Gerald Finch, trying to find any information that might help their case. What he discovered made everything more complicated. Dad, Finch wasn't just some random breeder. He was, Austin looked up from his laptop. He was your cousin. Second cousin, actually. Grandpa's brother's grandson. Nolan felt the words like a physical blow. What? Gerald Finch. Born in Millbrook County, moved away for a while, came back and started the breeding operation about 8 years ago. Austin pulled up a family tree he'd found online. You would have known him when you were kids, probably. Nolan searched his memory. Gerald. The name stirred something. A skinny kid at family reunions, maybe. Someone he'd barely known, hadn't thought about in decades. Then it clicked. Not a kid at family reunions, an adult. 10 years ago, maybe 12, a man had shown up at the farm, asking Nolan's father for money. Said he was starting a business, needed investors. Nolan's father had refused, said the business plan was sketchy. The guy seemed unreliable. Nolan had been there for that conversation, had agreed with his father's assessment, had thought nothing more about it. Oh, God, he said quietly. What? He came here once, asked for money. We refused. Nolan sat down heavily. If I'd helped him then, Dad, no. You can't. If I'd helped him, maybe he wouldn't have gone bankrupt. Maybe those dogs wouldn't have been abandoned. Maybe... Stop! Austin's voice was sharp. You're not responsible for his choices. He ran an illegal breeding operation. That's on him, not you. But the guilt settled in anyway, heavy and familiar. Another failure. Another person he'd let down. The fact that Finch was family made it worse somehow. The news got around town quickly. Maple Ridge thrived on information, and information this juicy spread like wildfire. Nolan became aware of whispers, sidelong glances. The heroic narrative was complicating. Now he was the man who'd refused to help family, who might have prevented this whole mess if he'd been more generous. Councilwoman Donovan showed up at the farm 2 days later with a proposal. I've been in contact with the creditors, she said, sitting in Nolan's kitchen uninvited. I can make this go away. How? I pay off what's owed to Finch's creditors, the full $75,000 plus legal fees. In exchange, you deed this property to me. I'll run the sanctuary as a non-profit, hire proper management, ensure the dogs are cared for. You and Austin can stay involved if you want, but the liability and financial burden transfer to me, and you get the land. I get an investment property, yes, but everyone wins. The dogs stay safe. The creditors get paid. You're free of debt, she smiled. It's the practical solution, Nolan. I need to think about it. Don't think too long. The creditors are impatient. After she left, Nolan stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the barn. His grandfather had built that barn. His father had maintained it. 3 generations of Briggs had worked this land, and now it might slip away because of abandoned puppies and bankruptcy law. Austin found him there an hour later. Lauren's mom did some research. Turns out Donovan invested in Finch's breeding operation. $20,000 3 years ago. When it went bankrupt, she lost that money. So she's one of the creditors? Not officially. But she has financial interest in the estate being settled. Which means she engineered this. The legal claim, the timing, all of it. Austin nodded. She's been trying to get this property for years. This is just her latest attempt. The pieces fell into place. Donovan hadn't been offering help. She'd been orchestrating a takeover, using the law and Nolan's own compassion against him. The anger that rose in Nolan was different from what he'd felt before. Not the hot rage of injustice, but cold determination. He'd been manipulated, backed into a corner by someone who saw vulnerable people and animals as opportunities. Dr. Montgomery arrived that evening, called by Austin. She brought news that changed everything. I pulled Finch's veterinary records from when he was operating, she said, spreading papers across the kitchen table. Multiple citations for animal cruelty, overcrowding, inadequate care, infectious diseases. They filed 3 separate complaints with the county over 2 years. He was supposed to be shut down. Why wasn't he? That's the question I asked. The inspector at the time, before Pritchard, said he received pressure from above to ease off. Someone was protecting Finch. She pulled out another document. I did some digging in county records. Guess who made those calls? Donovan. Her office, multiple times. She had a financial stake in his operation, and she used her position to keep him operating despite violations. Dr. Montgomery looked at Nolan. which means those dogs weren't just abandoned. They were the product of an illegal operation that continued because of corruption. And creditors can't claim assets from criminal enterprise. Hope flickered in Nolan's chest. You're sure? I'm sure. But proving it, connecting all the dots, building a legal case that takes time and evidence. How much time? More than 2 weeks. Which is how long we have before the creditors can take legal action. They sat in silence, considering options. The clock was ticking. Donovan thought she'd won. The creditors thought they had a valid claim. And Nolan was caught between protecting the animals and protecting his family's land. Scout jumped into his lap as if sensing his distress. He stroked her soft fur, feeling the steady heartbeat beneath his fingers. This puppy had fought for her life. Maybe it was time he fought with the same determination. We need Inspector Pritchard, Nolan said quietly. He knows what Finch was doing. He filed those early complaints. Will he testify? I don't know. But we have to ask. Austin pulled out his phone. Then we asked tonight. Outside, darkness had fallen. In the barn, 107 puppies were settling for the night, unaware of the legal battles being fought on their behalf. And Nolan Briggs, faced with losing everything, decided that some things were worth fighting for, no matter the cost. Inspector Douglas Pritchard arrived at the farm the next morning, his county vehicle kicking up dust on the long driveway. Nolan met him at the porch, coffee already brewed, prepared to make his case. I appreciate you coming, Nolan said. Pritchard accepted the coffee, looked out at the barn. You said it was urgent. About Gerald Finch. They sat on the porch and Nolan laid out everything. The creditor's claim, Donovan's involvement, Dr. Montgomery's discovery of the complaints Pritchard himself had filed years ago. The pressure from above that had kept Finch operating despite violations. Pritchard listened without interrupting, his expression growing more troubled with each revelation. When Nolan finished, the inspector was quiet for a long moment. I should have pushed harder, he finally said. I knew what Finch was doing was wrong, but when Donovan's office called, when they made it clear my job might be at risk if I didn't back off, I chose my career over those animals. He met Nolan's eyes. I've regretted it ever since. Will you testify? About what I saw at Finch's operation? About the pressure I received? Yes, I'll testify to all of it, he paused. But you need to understand what you're up against. Donovan has connections, money, political capital. She'll fight dirty. So will we. Over the next 2 weeks, they built their case. Felix worked 18-hour days, gathering evidence, interviewing witnesses, constructing legal arguments. Dr. Montgomery provided detailed documentation of Finch's violations. Pritchard gave a sworn statement about the political interference. Austin and Lauren worked together to document the transformation of every puppy. Before and after photos, medical records, testimonials from adoptive families. They created a presentation that showed not just legal arguments, but human impact. The hearing was scheduled for early December, 3 weeks away. Nolan tried to maintain normal operations, but the weight of what was coming pressed on him constantly. Some nights he barely slept, lying awake running through worst-case scenarios. One evening he found himself holding Diane's wedding ring. He'd kept it in a small box in his nightstand, unable to wear it, but unable to put it away. The gold band caught the lamplight, and he thought about selling it. The ring would bring in money, not enough to pay the creditors, but enough to help with legal fees. Austin found him sitting there, the ring in his palm. Dad, you can't. It's just a piece of metal. It's not, and you know it. Austin sat beside him. Mom wouldn't want you to give that up. Not for this. Not for anything. She'd want me to do whatever it takes to protect these animals. She'd also want you to keep something of hers. Austin's voice was gentle. You don't have to sacrifice everything to prove you care. Nolan closed his fist around the ring, feeling its weight. Austin was right. Some things couldn't be measured in dollars or legal victories. Some things had value beyond practical use. He put the ring back in its box. The following Sunday, Pastor Glenn organized a prayer vigil at the church. Nolan didn't want to go. Public displays of emotion still made him uncomfortable. But Austin insisted. The church was packed, every pew filled, people standing along the walls. When Nolan walked in, a hush fell over the congregation. He took a seat in the back, trying to be inconspicuous. Pastor Glenn spoke about community, about standing together in difficult times, about the moral obligation to protect the vulnerable. Then he invited people to share their thoughts. Beverly stood first. Nolan Briggs gave us something to believe in. He reminded us that individual actions matter, that one person can make a difference. Whatever happens in court, that truth remains. Others followed. The elderly man who'd adopted the first puppy spoke about how his dog had given him a reason to get up in the morning. A young mother talked about her daughter's bond with their rescue. A teenager described volunteering at the barn and discovering a passion for veterinary medicine. Then Pritchard stood. I owe Mr. Briggs an apology. Years ago, I failed to do my job because I was afraid of the consequences. He found those animals and did what was right without hesitation. That's courage. That's integrity. And I'm honored to help him fight for them now. Finally, Dr. Montgomery spoke. I lost my husband 8 years ago. For a long time after, I just went through motions. Working, sleeping, existing, but not really living. This sanctuary brought me back to life. These animals, and the man who saved them, reminded me what it means to care about something beyond yourself. When the vigil ended, people lined up to shake Nolan's hand, hug him, promise support. He was overwhelmed by it all. These people, his community, were standing with him not because they had to, but because they wanted to. On the drive home, Austin said, "You're not alone in this, Dad. You know that, right?" "I'm starting to." 3 days before the hearing, Felix called with news. "I've been digging into Donovan's financial records, public information from her campaign disclosures. She invested heavily in properties along the highway corridor, 20 properties in 5 years. Your land is the only piece she doesn't control. So this really is just about real estate. It's about money. It always is, with people like her. She sees a shopping complex, rental income, long-term profit. The dogs are irrelevant to her. You're an obstacle to be removed. Can we use this in court? We can establish motive. Show that she's not acting out of concern for the law, but out of financial self-interest. Combined with Pritchard's testimony about political interference and Dr. Montgomery's evidence of Finch's illegal operation, we have a strong case." He paused. "But Nolan, I need you to be prepared. Even strong cases can lose. Judges are unpredictable. The law doesn't always align with justice. That night, Nolan couldn't sleep. He got up at 3 in the morning and went to the barn. Scout followed, as she always did. Inside, the puppies were mostly sleeping. Soft breathing, the occasional dream whimper, the rustle of movement in straw. He walked through the pens, checking on the ones he worried about most. A small mixed breed with a chronic respiratory condition. An older puppy that had been at the sanctuary since the beginning, overlooked by potential adopters because of its age. A shy retriever that still flinched at sudden movements. Each one had a story. Each one mattered. And in 3 days, a judge would decide their fate based on legal technicalities and bankruptcy law and arguments about property rights. Nolan sat on his familiar crate, Scout curling up at his feet. He thought about Diane, about what she would say if she were here. Probably something about having faith. About trusting that doing the right thing was enough, regardless of outcome. He wasn't sure he believed that anymore. The world was more complicated than right and wrong. But he believed in these animals, in the community that had rallied around them, in the possibility that sometimes, despite everything, justice prevailed. Lauren found him there at dawn. "Austin sent me to get you. He's made breakfast. Says you need to eat before the final prep meeting with Felix. I'll be there in a minute." She sat beside him instead. "My mom told me about when she lost my dad, how she thought she'd never feel normal again. But then slowly, through small acts of living, she found her way back." She looked at the puppies. "You've helped a lot of people find their way back, Nolan, including my mom, including Austin, including me. I was just trying to save some dogs. That's how healing starts, by caring about something outside yourself." She stood, offered her hand. "Come on, let's go prepare to win this thing." Nolan took her hand and let her pull him up. 3 days until the hearing, 72 hours until everything changed. He was as ready as he'd ever be. The courthouse in Millbrook County was a stern brick building that had stood for 100 years. Nolan arrived early, wearing the only suit he owned, the same one he'd worn to Diane's funeral. Austin walked beside him, carrying a briefcase full of documents. Behind them, a convoy of supporters from Maple Ridge filled the parking lot. The courtroom was packed by 9 o'clock. Judge Constance Fairfield presiding, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and a reputation for fairness but also strictness. She looked over the crowded gallery with raised eyebrows. "This is a civil hearing, not a circus. I'll have order or I'll clear the room." "Understood?" Everyone nodded. The creditor's attorney presented first. His name was Vincent Shaw, expensive suit, confident delivery. He laid out the case with clinical precision. "Your Honor, this is straightforward. Gerald Finch operated a dog breeding business. When his business went bankrupt, he left assets, specifically 207 dogs, on Mr. Briggs's property. Those animals belong to Mr. Finch's estate. The creditors have legal claim to those assets. Mr. Briggs took possession without authorization and facilitated adoptions without legal standing. We're seeking return of remaining animals and compensation of $75,000 for those already adopted." Judge Fairfield made notes. "Mr. Grayson, your response." Felix stood, straightening his tie. "Your Honor, my client discovered these animals in a state of severe neglect. Multiple animals were dead. Others were dying. He acted out of humanitarian necessity. Furthermore, these animals weren't simply abandoned. They were the product of an illegal breeding operation. Creditors cannot claim proceeds from criminal activity. That's a serious allegation. Can you substantiate it?" "We can, Your Honor, with testimony and documented evidence," Shaw objected. "Your Honor, Mr. Finch's business practices are irrelevant to the property claim. I'll decide what's relevant." "Mr. Shaw," Judge Fairfield turned to Felix. "Present your evidence." Felix called Dr. Montgomery first. She took the stand, was sworn in, and testified about the puppy's condition when she first examined them. Her testimony was detailed, professional, devastating. "In my 30 years of veterinary practice, I've never seen animals in worse condition. Severe malnutrition, dehydration, multiple infections. 3 were already dead. Several more died despite treatment. These animals had been without adequate food, water, or medical care for at least a week, possibly longer," Shaw cross-examined. "Dr. Montgomery, you've become personally involved with Mr. Briggs's sanctuary, correct? You've reduced your fees, provided pro bono services?" "I have. So you have a financial interest in the outcome of this case." "I have an ethical interest. Those animals needed help. Mr. Briggs provided it. I supported that effort. But your objectivity is compromised. My objectivity is based on 30 years of medical training and documented evidence. The condition of those animals speaks for itself." Judge Fairfield intervened. "Mr. Shaw, move on." Next, Felix presented documentation. Photographs of the barn when Nolan first found it. Medical records. Before and after images of individual puppies. The gallery watched in silence as the evidence mounted. Then Felix called Inspector Pritchard. Pritchard took the stand, clearly nervous but determined. He testified about visiting Finch's breeding operation years earlier, about documenting violations, about filing complaints that should have resulted in the operation being shut down. "But it wasn't shut down," Felix said. "Why not?" "I received calls from the county administrator's office. I was told to ease off, that Mr. Finch was working to correct the violations." "Was he?" "No, the violations continued. Animals were kept in overcrowded, unsanitary conditions. But every time I tried to take action, I was told to give him more time." "Who specifically told you to ease off?" Pritchard hesitated then. "The calls came from Councilwoman Iris Donovan's office. She said Mr. Finch was a constituent, that he deserved a chance to comply with regulations." The courtroom erupted. Judge Fairfield's gavel came down hard. "Order! I will have order!" Shaw was on his feet. "Your Honor, this is completely inappropriate. Councilwoman Donovan is not on trial here, but her involvement is relevant to establishing the criminal nature of Mr. Finch's operation," Felix countered, "which directly impacts whether creditors can claim these animals as legitimate assets." Judge Fairfield called for a recess. I need to review this evidence. 30 minutes. During the break, Nolan stood outside the courthouse, breathing cold December air. Austin joined him, along with Beverly and Dr. Montgomery. It's going well, Austin said. Is it? Nolan felt numb. The legal arguments, the testimony, all of it felt abstract compared to the simple reality of 107 puppies waiting at home. Pritchard's testimony was powerful, Dr. Montgomery said. He connected Donovan to the illegal operation. That changes everything. When they reconvened, Judge Fairfield's expression was unreadable. She addressed Shaw first. Mr. Shaw, I've reviewed the evidence presented. The testimony regarding Mr. Finch's operation is troubling. Do your clients have any knowledge of the conditions under which these animals were kept? Your Honor, the creditors are simply seeking to recover assets. Assets obtained through potentially criminal activity. That's relevant, Mr. Shaw. She turned to Felix. Mr. Grayson, you've established that Mr. Finch's operation was problematic. But that doesn't automatically transfer ownership to Mr. Briggs. No, Your Honor. But it does establish that these animals were abandoned in life-threatening conditions, that my client acted to save them, and that the operation they came from was illegal. Under those circumstances, the creditor's claim lacks merit. I need to hear from Mr. Briggs himself. Judge Fairfield looked at Nolan. Mr. Briggs, please take the stand. Nolan's heart hammered as he walked to the witness box. He was sworn in, sat down, faced the judge. Mr. Briggs, in your own words, tell me what happened when you found these animals. Nolan took a breath. I heard them crying. My son and I were walking the property, and we heard whimpering from an old barn. When we got inside, his voice caught. He steadied himself. They were in bad shape, scared, starving. Some of them were dying. I didn't think about law or property rights. I just thought about keeping them alive. You took on significant responsibility. Why? Because they needed help. Because walking away wasn't an option. He paused. My wife died 2 years ago. Since then I've been lost. These animals gave me purpose again. A reason to get up in the morning. But more than that, they reminded me what it means to care about something outside yourself. Judge Fairfield studied him. And the families who adopted these dogs? You facilitated those adoptions? Yes, ma'am. With careful vetting, home visits, references, we wanted to make sure each puppy went to a good home. You understand that legally you may not have had the right to do that. I understand. But those puppies couldn't wait for lawyers to sort out property rights. They needed families. They needed homes. And those families, they needed those dogs too. The courtroom was silent. Judge Fairfield made notes, her expression giving nothing away. Thank you, Mr. Briggs. You may step down. Shaw stood for cross-examination. Mr. Briggs, you mentioned your wife's death affected you deeply. Would you say you were in an emotionally vulnerable state when you found these animals? Felix objected. Relevance, Your Honor. I'm establishing Mr. Briggs's state of mind, which affects his decision-making capacity. Judge Fairfield allowed it. Answer the question, Mr. Briggs. I was grieving, yes. Still am, but finding those puppies didn't cloud my judgment. It clarified it, Shaw pressed on. You took on enormous financial burden, medical bills exceeding $18,000, daily expenses. You put yourself and your son at financial risk. Would you call that rational behavior? I'd call it the right thing to do, even if it meant potentially losing your family's property. Nolan met Shaw's eyes. Those animals didn't choose to be born into a bad situation. They didn't choose to be abandoned. Someone had to choose to help them. I chose. And I'd make the same choice again. Shaw switched tactics. You're aware that Gerald Finch was your cousin? The courtroom stirred. Nolan saw Austin stiffen in his seat. I learned that recently, yes. And you're aware he approached your father for financial help years ago? Help that was refused? I am. So, in a sense, your family's refusal to help Mr. Finch contributed to his financial difficulties, which led to him abandoning these animals. Wouldn't you agree? Felix was on his feet. Your Honor, this is outrageous. But Nolan spoke before the judge could rule. No, I don't agree. Gerald Finch made his own choices. He chose to run an illegal operation. He chose to mistreat animals. He chose to abandon them when things got hard. Those were his choices, not mine. Not my father's. Shaw looked satisfied, like he'd gotten what he wanted. No further questions. Felix called Austin next. He testified about the sanctuary's operations, the care protocols, the adoption process. He presented the USB drive containing all their documentation, financial records, medical logs, volunteer schedules, testimonials from adoptive families. "We've documented everything," Austin said. "Every dollar spent, every medical treatment, every adoption. This isn't some haphazard rescue. It's a professional operation built by people who care." Then Felix revealed the final piece of evidence, a cancelled check obtained through legal discovery, made out from a company owned by Iris Donovan to Gerald Finch's breeding operation. $20,000 dated 3 years ago. "Your Honor, this proves Councilwoman Donovan had direct financial interest in Mr. Finch's operation. When it failed, she lost her investment. Now she's using her position to recoup those losses by claiming the animals as assets and acquiring Mr. Briggs's property." Shaw objected strenuously. Judge Fairfield overruled him. "This goes to motive and credibility, Mr. Shaw. I'll allow it," Felix continued. "Councilwoman Donovan isn't in this courtroom today, but her influence is everywhere in this case. She invested in an illegal operation. She used her political position to prevent it from being shut down. And now she's orchestrating this legal action to profit from her own failed investment." The courtroom erupted again. Judge Fairfield's gavel came down repeatedly. "Order! Mr. Shaw, do the creditors have any response to these allegations?" Shaw conferred with his clients, then stood. "Your Honor, we request a continuance to investigate these claims." "Denied. You've had time to prepare your case. Mr. Grayson, anything else?" "Just one more witness, Your Honor, Casey Brennan, veterinary student who's been working at the sanctuary." Casey took the stand, young and earnest. She testified about the transformation she'd witnessed in the puppies, but also in the community. Before the sanctuary, Maple Ridge was quiet. People kept to themselves, but this brought everyone together. "I've seen elderly people volunteer alongside teenagers. I've watched families bond over caring for these animals. Mr. Briggs didn't just save puppies. He reminded us what community means." When she finished, Judge Fairfield called another recess. "I need time to consider all the evidence. We'll reconvene in 1 hour for my ruling." Outside, Nolan couldn't sit still. He paced the courthouse steps while supporters gathered around, offering encouragement he couldn't quite absorb. His mind kept cycling through everything that had been said, every argument, every piece of evidence. Dr. Montgomery found him alone in a quiet corner. "However this goes, you did everything right." "Did I?" Shaw made it sound like I was emotionally unstable. Like I took on these dogs because I couldn't handle my grief. Maybe that's partly true. But so what? You turned grief into purpose. You transformed pain into healing. That's not weakness, Nolan, that's strength. When they returned to the courtroom, Judge Fairfield's expression was grave. She waited for everyone to settle before speaking. "I've reviewed all the evidence presented today. This case involves complex questions about property rights, bankruptcy law, and animal welfare. But at its core, it's about what we value as a society." She looked at Shaw and his clients. "The creditor's claim is legally defensible under normal circumstances, but these are not normal circumstances. The evidence clearly shows Mr. Finch operated an illegal breeding facility. Multiple violations were documented, animals were kept in inhumane conditions, and political interference prevented proper enforcement of animal welfare laws." She turned to the evidence of Donovan's involvement. "The financial connection between one of the creditor's representatives and Mr. Finch's operation raises serious questions about motive. This appears less about recovering legitimate assets and more about profiting from criminal activity." Shaw started to object. Judge Fairfield cut him off. "I'm not finished. Mr. Briggs acted when he discovered animals in immediate danger. He provided necessary care, sought proper medical attention, and established a functioning sanctuary with community support. His actions were not only humane but necessary." She paused, her gaze sweeping the courtroom. "Therefore, I rule in favor of the defendant. The creditor's claims are denied. Mr. Briggs retains custody of all animals currently at the sanctuary. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the State Attorney General for investigation of potential corruption and animal cruelty charges related to Mr. Finch's operation and those who enabled it. The courtroom exploded. People cheering, crying, embracing. Judge Fairfield's gavel came down one final time. This court is adjourned. Nolan sat frozen, unable to process what he'd just heard. They'd won. The puppies were safe. The sanctuary would continue. Austin grabbed him in a fierce hug. "We did it, Dad. We actually did it." Around them, celebration erupted. But Nolan could only think of 107 puppies waiting at home, finally, truly safe. 6 months after the court victory, Nolan stood at the entrance to the newly renovated barn and barely recognized it. What had once been a crumbling structure hidden under ivy was now a proper facility, with clean lines, fresh paint, and a sign that made his chest tight every time he saw it. Briggs Haven Sanctuary, founded by Nolan and Diane Briggs. Austin had insisted on including Diane's name. "She started this with you, Dad, all those years raising dogs together. This is part of her legacy, too." The sanctuary had grown beyond anything Nolan imagined that cold November morning when he'd first heard the whimpering. They'd formalized operations, obtained all necessary licenses, established a board of directors. Dr. Montgomery served as chief veterinarian, with Casey and 2 other vet students rotating through as interns. Beverly managed volunteers. Pastor Glenn handled community outreach. All 207 original puppies had been adopted or, in a few cases, had found permanent homes at the sanctuary. But word had spread. Now they received calls weekly from across the region. Abandoned animals, neglected strays, situations where no one else would step in. The sanctuary had become a safety net for the forgotten. Nolan walked through the main building, checking on the current residents. 32 dogs today, ranging from puppies to seniors, each with a story, each waiting for their second chance. In the far corner, in what had become his favorite spot, Scout slept on a cushioned bed. She was technically Nolan's dog now, though he'd never planned to keep her. Somehow the adoption papers had never gotten filed. Somehow she'd just stayed, following him through his days, sleeping beside his cot at night. "Dad, they're here!" Austin called from the doorway. Today was the grand opening of the education center, a new building constructed with grant money and community donations. Local schools would bring students for programs about animal care, responsibility, compassion. It was Beverly's idea, a way to invest in the next generation. The center was named Diane's Place. When Nolan had first seen the sign, he'd wept. Not the silent tears of grief he'd grown accustomed to, but something different. Gratitude, maybe, or recognition that Diane's love continued to ripple outward, touching lives she'd never meet. The dedication ceremony drew a crowd of 200. Nolan stood uncomfortably at the front, while speakers praised his work, thanked the community, outlined the center's mission. He caught Austin's eye across the crowd. His son stood with Lauren, her hand in his. They'd gotten engaged last month, planning a summer wedding on the farm. When it was Nolan's turn to speak, he approached the microphone with reluctance. Public speaking still made him anxious, but these people had earned his words. "I'm not good at speeches," he began, "so I'll keep this brief. 6 months ago, I found some dogs that needed help. I helped them. That's all I was trying to do. But something happened that I didn't expect. They helped me, too." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "My wife Diane died 2 years before I found those puppies. For those 2 years I was lost, going through motions, existing but not really living. Then I heard crying from an old barn, and everything changed. Not because I'm special or heroic. Because I chose to care when caring was hard." He looked around at the faces watching him. "This sanctuary isn't mine. It belongs to all of you. Every person who volunteered, who donated, who showed up when it mattered. You built this. I just opened the door." After the ceremony, people lingered. Children played with adoptable puppies in the exercise yard. Adults toured the new facility. The local news interviewed volunteers. It felt more like a community celebration than a formal opening. Nolan found himself alone for a moment, standing by Diane's memorial plaque mounted near the center's entrance. Her photograph smiled out at him, the same photo he'd carried in his wallet, now enlarged and framed. "Quite a day," Dr. Montgomery said, appearing beside him. "She would have loved this. I think she does love it. Wherever she is," Dr. Montgomery smiled. "You've created something lasting here, Nolan, something that will help animals and people for years to come. We created it, all of us. True, but you were the catalyst. You were the one who chose to act when action was needed." She paused. "I've been meaning to tell you I'm grateful. This work, being part of this sanctuary, it gave me back something I thought I'd lost. Purpose, connection, joy." After she left, Nolan walked to the old barn, the original structure where everything had started. They'd kept it standing, renovated it into a quiet space for reflection. Inside, photographs lined the walls. Before and after images of the 207 puppies. Updates from adoptive families. The growing story of Briggs Haven. Scout followed him inside, her nails clicking on the wooden floor. She was healthy now, well-fed and happy, with a shine to her coat and confidence in her step. Seeing her transform had been one of the great joys of these past months. Austin found him there an hour later. "People are starting to leave. They want to say goodbye. I'll be there in a minute. Dad, I wanted to tell you Lauren and I have been talking about the wedding. We'd like to have it here on the farm, with Scout as ring bearer." Nolan looked at his son, saw the young man he'd become, strong, capable, happy in ways he hadn't been since Diane died. "Your mother would love that, I know. That's why we want to do it." Austin sat beside him on the bench. "You know what I realized? These past 6 months we've talked more than we did in the previous 2 years combined. Working together, building this place, it brought us back to each other. It brought me back to myself." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the sanctuary winding down for the evening. Dogs barking, volunteers saying goodbye, the gentle rhythm of a place that had found its purpose. That night, after everyone left, Nolan walked the property one last time, past the new education center with Diane's name above the door, past the renovated barn where 207 puppies had once fought for survival, past the main house where Austin and Lauren would soon start their married life. He stopped at Diane's grave, marked by a simple stone under an old oak tree. Scout sat beside him, leaning against his leg. "I did it," he said quietly to the stone. "I found something worth fighting for, just like you hoped I would." The evening star appeared in the darkening sky. A cool breeze rustled through the trees, and Nolan Briggs, who'd once thought his life was over, stood on land his grandfather had worked, surrounded by evidence that healing was possible, that purpose could be found, that sometimes the things we save end up saving us. Scout whimpered softly. Nolan reached down, stroked her soft fur. "Come on, girl. Let's go home." They walked back to the barn together, man and dog, both rescued, both healing, both exactly where they needed to be.